She's drawing chalk flowers on my driveway, and your teenage son just called 911 on her? She's 3 years old, Merla. That's what I said, loud enough for the whole cul-de-sac to hear, while 2 patrol cars boxed in my Tesla, lights spinning, engines idling. One officer stood near the curb, hand resting on his vest. The other was already halfway up my walkway, eyes locked on the small figure crouched in pink overalls beside our porch steps. That figure was my daughter, Leary, and the thing she was vandalizing was a row of lavender chalk petals she'd drawn, each one the size of her palm, spaced precisely 3 inches apart. Her therapy plan called it pattern reinforcement. Merla Vexley, vice president of our HOA, called it destruction of visual integrity. She made the report from her upstairs balcony, sipping a can of Perrier like it was theater night. Possible defacement of public-facing surfaces. Unaccompanied minor present, she told dispatch. I know this because she repeated it, loudly as the officer stepped onto my property. What she didn't say? That it was my driveway, that I was watching from behind the screen door, that her teenage son, Dallin, was the one who dialed 911, smirking while filming the entire thing for the Crestmore Hollow community app. Sir, we received a call about an unsupervised child damaging HOA-maintained property, Officer Hansen said calmly, though I saw his eyes scan the chalk flowers. Do you have any ID? I have something better, I said, reaching into the folio clipped to our front door. This is a licensed sensory therapy program. It's court certified. The chalk is part of my daughter's trauma recovery protocol. He blinked, took the paperwork. Also, I added, looking straight at the camera mounted under Merla's eaves, this driveway is privately owned, parcel 43B91. The HOA's right-of-way ends 4 feet before the edge of those tulips. If you've ever had to memorize parcel codes just to stop a neighbor from turning your child's therapy into a police incident, hit subscribe. These people are real, and this story only gets worse. I stepped forward, gently positioning myself between Leary and the officers. She was still focused on her petals, pink now, then yellow, like she hadn't even registered the sirens. My name's Colvin Ruth, I told him. I'm a forensic documentation consultant for the state. I build evidentiary timelines for abuse investigations. I know exactly how this will read in an incident log. Behind me, Merla raised her phone, recording. She wore a thin smile and a collared blazer, like she was chairing a school fundraiser. Dallin hovered at her elbow, phone already uploading the footage to the HOA board Slack channel. They thought this was a win. Let me tell you why it wasn't. Leary hasn't spoken a word indoors since the night her mother died. A hit and run while we were packing for our first trip since her diagnosis. Leary saw the impact, saw me scream. After that, she went silent. Selective mutism, they called it. But outside, with chalk in her hand and a warm patch of sunlight, she finds her voice again. Those tulips, they aren't flowers. They're language, progress. Each one is a sentence she's not ready to say out loud. I'd fought for months to get a court-approved occupational therapy plan that gave her space to express without punishment. Merla Vexley tried to erase all of that with a phone call and a lie. She runs the HOA like a surveillance council. Her husband sells the security hardware that lines every mailbox column and garden wall. She has admin access to the camera portal, and because of that access, she knew Leary hadn't crossed the boundary line, but it didn't matter. Not to her, not to Dallin, not to the board that already fined us last month for sidewalk resonance. The moment those sirens turned off and the officers walked back to their cars, Merla started typing. 10 minutes later, I had an email in my inbox. Subject, notice of violation, visual defacement, child hazard clause. Breach penalty, $200 fine, HOA lien process initiated. She struck fast, confident I'd panic. What she didn't know? I'd already pulled the security feed metadata from the server. She submitted edited footage with mismatched timestamps, the kind of mistake only someone like me would notice. I didn't tell her that yet. I wanted her to feel safe, like she'd won, because people like Merla never suspect that someone quiet could build the evidence to burn them from the inside out. The next morning, I found the post. Dallin had uploaded the 911 call audio to Crestmore Hollow's Community Safety Watch channel. The title read, Underage Vandalism, You Decide. It was already getting traction. 10 comments, 4 thumbs up. and a reply from one of the HOA board members saying, "Appreciate the vigilance, young man. This is the kind of engagement our neighborhood needs." They were turning my daughter into a warning sign. The caption under the post was worse. Toddler chalk tags appearing again on lot 43B, no parent present. Called it in. Police responded. Compliance team to follow up. Not a word about the fact that Leary never left our property, that she never crossed the cement lip dividing our driveway from the shared sidewalk, or that I was there, just inside the screen door, watching her draw like I always did. I flagged the post. The site auto-replied, "Your report will be reviewed by the moderation team, HOA appointed." I already knew what that meant. By noon, 3 more comments were live, one from Merla herself. Parents need to consider the optics of unattended children and what kind of message that sends about safety in our community. Children are treasures, yes, but structure is love. Structure is love. It took everything in me not to reply. Instead, I took Leary's chalk away before she woke up, from her nap. The box sat heavy in my hand, like guilt. I told myself it was temporary, just until I figured out how to get this under control, just until the next board meeting maybe. When she stepped outside that afternoon and saw the empty porch bin, she didn't cry. She just sat down on the first step and stared at the cement. Silent. Still. Like the color had gone out of her world. And then, after a minute, she leaned her head against the rail and whispered one word. "Petals." That was all. A word she hadn't said in weeks. It landed in the center of my chest like a nail. I gave the chalk back. We drew together this time. I knelt beside her and added fat blue loops and tiny yellow dots, hoping, maybe foolishly, that if someone came by again, they'd see me there and know we weren't doing anything wrong. That night, I found the letter taped to my mailbox. No envelope, just HOA letterhead and Merla's signature at the bottom. Reminder, all residents are subject to the aesthetic integrity standards of Crestmore Hollow. Repeated visual markings, even if non-permanent, may result in fines, liens, or board mediation. Thank you for understanding. The same language they used last year when the Greers down the block tried to put wind chimes on their porch. The board claimed unregulated tonal fluctuations violated acoustic continuity. The Greers moved out 3 months later. I took the letter inside and laid it next to the citation email. Both sat under the framed photo of my wife that hung near the thermostat, her holding Leary on her lap, both of them barefoot and smeared with paint from the backyard art day we used to host before the HOA banned unpermitted group activities. This place had never wanted kids. That's what I was starting to understand. It wasn't about chalk, or driveways, or bylaws. It was about control, silence, order. Merla didn't like the way Leary's drawings made our home look alive, and now she had the board behind her. The next day, 2 men in polo shirts and clipboards showed up during Leary's playtime. They stood at the edge of the lawn, didn't say a word, and took pictures. Leary noticed. She dropped her chalk and climbed into my lap without saying anything. I didn't stop them. I didn't wave. I wanted them to look, wanted them to know I saw them. But I didn't move, because if I stood up too fast, they'd call it aggressive. If I said something, they'd say I was confrontational. That's how it works here. Later, I checked the HOA calendar. Next board meeting, 10 days away, and the last agenda item, resident disruptions, lot 43B review. We weren't just a warning anymore. We were a case file. Nereth Quen was the kind of man most people overlooked. Quiet, gray-sweatered, half-forgotten, even when he stood in front of you. I'd seen him before, always lingering around HOA events with a clipboard that no one asked for, and a thermos he never seemed to drink from. He was also the one board member who never commented on the community forum, never posted, never replied, just observed. So, when I opened my door that Saturday morning and found him standing awkwardly near the porch, eyes fixed on Leary's chalk trail like it was some kind of crime scene, I almost closed the door again. "I'm not here officially," he said quickly. I was doing an exterior scan on the East Loop drainage caps. We have a mold issue starting to creep under lot lines." I didn't answer. Leary was sitting cross-legged near the garage, drawing a sun. She didn't even look up. Nereth rocked slightly on his heels, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. "Something you should see," he muttered, holding it out like it was radioactive. Camera server logs from the last 4 days. I'm not supposed to have these, but, well, I archive everything. Old habit. I took the envelope without a word. You didn't get that from me, he added, eyes darting toward the corner, where a security dome blinked red above the mailboxes. And if anyone asks, I wasn't here. He turned to leave, then hesitated. I don't agree with how Merla's handling this, he said. It's not what I signed on for. That was the first thing that cracked. Inside, I laid the printouts flat across the dining table. Raw timestamps, server pings, packet traces. Nereth had gone deep, deeper than I expected. The log showed not only when Merla's household account accessed the Crestmore surveillance feed, but also when specific camera angles were requested, downloaded, and exported. 3 of the timestamps were red flagged in his handwriting. Tuesday, 3:21 p.m., access on camera, 12B, my front driveway. Tuesday, 3:27 p.m., download initiated. Tuesday, 3:28 p.m., re-exported at 11 seconds offset, 11 seconds. It doesn't sound like much until you realize what happened during those seconds. It's when I opened the screen door, when I stepped fully into frame and clearly entered Leary's line of sight, when any reasonable person watching would have known she wasn't alone, wasn't abandoned, wasn't drawing on public property. That version of the video was never sent to the police, never shown to the board. Merla cut it, cropped out the truth like it was an imperfection in her garden. I printed the logs and locked them in my fireproof safe. Later that day, I saw Nereth again, not in person, on the community feed. He'd posted a maintenance update about the East Loop drains. Nothing controversial. Just a photo of a rusting cap and a short caption. Not all rot is visible from above. Only I knew what that meant. The next morning, a new citation arrived. This one was labeled Second Offense, Visual Disorder Continuation. It included an image, Leary's chalk sun with my shadow visible behind her. They hadn't even tried to blur me out. Just posted it like it was proof of something, like being present was a crime now too. But I didn't argue, didn't email back, because now I had something stronger than a rebuttal. I had a witness, someone inside the system. And as much as Nereth tried to keep his head down, something about this had gotten to him. Maybe it was Leary's drawings, maybe it was Merla's smugness, or maybe, just maybe, he was tired of keeping quiet while people like her turned rules into weapons. I kept the envelope he gave me tucked inside my laptop case, right behind Leary's therapy plan and a flash drive labeled Server Log Chain, full. I wasn't going to rush, not yet, but the shape of the plan was forming, quietly, patiently. And Merla had no idea that the first crack in her perfect little world had just come from one of her own. 3 days later, the letter arrived with a red sticker across the top. Escalation notice. Imminent violation hearing. The font was larger, bolder than the others, and the language inside had shifted from potential fine to lien eligibility status under review. They weren't just posturing anymore. They were moving. According to the letter, the HOA had compiled multiple instances of visual disruption originating from Lot 43B, including uncontrolled child play, unsanctioned art materials, and failure to adhere to prior warnings regarding surface integrity. They'd scheduled a board hearing in 5 days. I was required to appear. No option for rescheduling. No details on what rights I had to respond. Just a line that read, "Failure to attend may result in lien placement and legal forwarding." I set the letter down beside the others, a neat row of warnings, fines, and notices, each more aggressive than the last. My house was being reclassified into a problem, the kind the HOA could punish, the kind they could profit from. But they still hadn't learned the difference between silence and surrender. That afternoon, I received an HOA-wide email from Merla titled Community Harmony Through Visual Cohesion. It was 2 pages long, filled with phrases like aesthetic responsibility and mutual standards of dignity. The final paragraph thanked our younger residents, especially those helping report disturbances. She was giving Dallin credit, again, elevating a 16-year-old boy for calling 911 on a toddler drawing flowers on her own driveway. I clicked over to the HOA member page. Dallin was now listed as Junior Safety Coordinator, Volunteer Liaison. They'd created a title for him, I didn't tell Leary about the hearing, didn't tell her what they were doing, but I did sit with her longer that evening. As she traced a green spiral into the sidewalk's edge, I added a blue circle beside it, watching how her brow softened when she saw the shape grow. Her voice returned for just a moment. "Sky button," she said. 2 words, quiet, careful. The kind she hadn't said since the night of the police call. I didn't draw back. I didn't speak. I just kept making circles. That night, I started building the case, not just collecting files, but structuring them. Screenshotting every comment Dallin had posted, every thread Merla had replied to, every photo of my daughter that had been circulated without consent. I downloaded the HOA's bylaws from the portal and ran them through a clause scanner I'd built years ago for a legal firm, highlighting phrases like surface use, right of way, and resident responsibility. Most of their violations cited Section 9.3. I flagged that clause and ran comparisons on enforcement history. They had only invoked it 3 times in the past 5 years. Once for a rusted basketball hoop, once for an unpermitted mural on a retaining wall, once for a Halloween display that used red lighting. None of those things were chalk. None were temporary, none involved children, and none led to a 911 call. The next day, the HOA sent 2 board members to my property. Not Merla. She was too careful for that. Instead, it was Laurel Trent, the compliance officer, and Greg Tanzer, who worked as their records manager. They didn't ring the bell, just stood at the end of the walkway, snapping photos again. Laurel wrote something on a clipboard. Greg checked something on his phone, nodded, and they turned to leave. I stepped outside. Laurel paused. "Mr. Ruth, just doing a routine surface assessment." Documenting what? Residual chalk markings, surface runoff patterns, public visibility. I didn't respond. Just took a photo of them with my phone. I didn't need to say anything. Their discomfort said enough. Greg looked at me like he wanted to say something. His mouth opened, then closed again. And then they left. When I reviewed the HOA app later that night, there was a new forum post from a board account. Visual alert. Parents, please avoid using non-approved surface materials during your child's outdoor play. Materials such as chalk, paint, and dye may pose cleaning or liability issues and may be subject to HOA scrutiny. Thank you for keeping Crestmore beautiful. No names, no photos. But I knew exactly who it was aimed at. They were tightening the noose. But I wasn't preparing a defense anymore. I was preparing a counterattack. The notice came tucked inside a white envelope without a return address. Just my name, printed in all caps and slipped into the side of our mailbox like it had been hand-delivered. Inside was a still frame from a surveillance camera, Leary, kneeling on the driveway, a chalk spiral in progress beneath her hand. The image had been cropped tightly, no timestamp, no camera ID, just a single line across the bottom. Persistent noncompliance will result in forced remediation. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the photo under the overhead light, jaw locked. Remediation, not fine, not notice, not warning. That word meant something else entirely. I scanned the HOA documentation again. No clause included remediation as an enforcement measure. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't even a formal hearing term. It was a wild card, a term someone like Merla could use to justify anything. Forced cleanup, HOA contractor entry, paint removal, under the guise of protecting community integrity. I emailed the HOA board. I kept it short. Please provide written clarification on the term forced remediation and under what legal authority the HOA believes it may enforce such an action on private property. I never got a reply. But 2 days later, the camera above my garage started blinking green instead of red. That's how I knew someone had accessed it. The vendor who installed the Crestmore Hollow system, Vexley Tech integration, was listed on every HOA maintenance request. I traced the access logs through my firewall, admin override, external login, and the IP address that accessed it, same subnet as the HOA server, internal access point. Merla had watched Leary draw through our own camera. I sat back in my chair and stared at the flickering light above the garage feed. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't just a control game. It was surveillance, coordinated, quiet, and with zero accountability. I opened the packet Nerith had given me again. reread the red flagged entries, camera feed requests, re-export logs, timestamps. The edits weren't just sneaky, they were deliberate, chosen down to the second to remove my presence and reframe Leary's chalk art as something sinister. I compiled the evidence, timestamp logs, access traces, HOA footage download records, and I combined them into a single audit folder, each page labeled, each step annotated. Then I opened the HUD Civil Rights Complaint form. Under Nature of Complaint, I wrote, abuse of HOA authority resulting in the targeted surveillance and emotional endangerment of a child with a federally recognized disability. Under Evidence of discrimination, I wrote, surveillance footage altered to exclude legal guardian, false reports filed to law enforcement, HOA internal forum weaponized against minor, court-approved therapy plan ignored despite submission. Under requested outcome, I wrote, federal review, immediate halt of punitive actions, bylaw review, revocation of board access to resident-owned cameras, ADA training and policy enforcement. I submitted it. Then I copied everything into a formal report for the city's Fair Housing and Community Relations Division, then CPS's watchdog desk, then the Office of the County Commissioner, 3 copies, 3 agencies. 3 separate investigations launched in less than 6 hours. By evening, I had a callback from a HUD case manager asking for supplemental documentation. I uploaded the server logs. I uploaded the edited video. I uploaded the side-by-side footage, Merla's version and mine. It was no longer my word against hers. It was a certified chain of evidence. I sat down at the kitchen table, stared at the bloom trail Leary had drawn that afternoon. The colors faded slightly in the light, smudged near the edge where her shoe had dragged. That trail was never meant to survive. Chalk doesn't last. But the harm they tried to build on top of it, that could have lasted years. Not anymore. Merla hadn't just crossed the line. She crossed into my domain. The domain of truth, record-keeping, and federal documentation law. She weaponized my daughter's healing against her. She turned a 3-year-old into a neighborhood threat. And now I had the receipts. The envelope wasn't in my mailbox this time. It was shoved into my storm door, half crumpled, like someone wanted to make sure I saw it the second I opened my home. Inside, a printed agenda for the upcoming HOA board hearing. My name at the bottom, under a bolded title, Resident Conduct and Property Compliance Review, Lot 43B, Final Warning. They'd moved it up, 2 days earlier than scheduled. They weren't waiting. I scanned the document. It included no time allocation, no summary of my violation, no opportunity for rebuttal. Just a note. HOA reserves the right to determine outcomes without formal resident input, if deemed appropriate by the majority board vote. They were trying to bypass me completely. The air in the house felt colder than it should have. I checked the thermostat. Normal. But something under my skin was shifting, tightening. This wasn't just a lie anymore. It was a machine. And I was watching it pick up speed. I turned to my laptop and opened the compliance folder. HUD had responded to my complaint with a formal case number. They had assigned a field investigator. CPS hadn't responded yet, but the City Housing Department had sent back a request for all historical HOA citations for Lot 43B. I attached everything, every false report, every manipulated photo, every forum post that Dallin had tagged with security concern. But it wasn't just paper anymore. It was people. Leary hadn't spoken again since her 2-word breakthrough. She'd started drawing slower, shorter lines, no spirals. Her chalk trail stopped 4 feet shorter than usual the night before. She kept glancing at the mailbox now, like it might yell. She was absorbing the surveillance. She was learning what it meant to be watched without understanding why. I couldn't let it continue. That night, I heard a soft tap on the door. Nerith. He looked worse than before, shirt wrinkled, thermos missing, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. I shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I don't know how long I'll stay on the board after this. Then why are you here? He pulled out a folder from his coat. It's the raw system export queue, he said. Every download request made by any board member in the last 2 weeks. I opened it on the table. It was worse than I expected. Not just 1 video, 6. Merla had pulled angles from our porch cam, street cam, and even the communal trash corridor adjacent to our property, stitched them together, labeled them incident logs, and sent them to the board for inclusion in the case file. Every one of them was clipped, trimmed, cropped. One even had the audio stripped entirely. "This isn't just surveillance," I said, scanning the logs. "It's fabrication." Nareth nodded. "Greg Tanzer knows. He's not comfortable with it either." I looked up. "Is he willing to say that?" "Not yet, but he might be, if it comes to a vote." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They had a case built on lies, but I had logs, timestamps, backup server chains, the kind of thing that wouldn't just collapse their story, but open them to civil exposure. And still, I needed more. Not just proof, not just outrage, something they couldn't dismiss as emotional or subjective. So I went back to the one place they couldn't touch: the code. I pulled every system log from the Crestmore Hollow security interface I had access to, each packet ping from the cameras, each login event from Merla's IP block, each download entry tagged by board admin credentials. I built a visual timeline, layered by source, overlaid with sound, movement, and resident proximity, the entire narrative cut clean and simple. Then I cross-checked the HOA's own bylaws, especially Clause 7.1.9. Board surveillance review materials must retain full date-stamped context to be admissible for violation action. That clause had never mattered, until now. Merla had violated her own rule. I saved everything to a drive, sealed it in an envelope, and labeled it in black marker: board tampering evidence, HUD copy. They wanted to push me out before the hearing, but by the time the board met, someone else would already be watching, and this time, it wouldn't be through a camera lens. It was just after 6 a.m. when my phone buzzed, an unknown number, no caller ID. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. "This is Greg Tanzer," the voice said, low, shaky. "You don't know me, but I'm the HOA records manager. I think I'm done helping them." I stayed silent. He filled the silence himself. "I didn't know how far it went," he said. "Not until Merla had me prep the packet for the hearing. I thought it was just chalk, thought the fine was procedural. But what I saw," he exhaled. "She cut you out of all of it. Every clip, every frame where you're clearly standing there with your daughter, it's been cropped, blurred, or spliced. She even removed ambient audio. The board won't know unless they compare it to the raw feed." "I have the raw feed," I said. Greg was quiet for a moment. "I figured you might. Look, I can't go public. I have a mortgage here. Kids. But I saved the original hearing packet she gave me to edit. I have both versions, hers and mine. I can send them to you, anonymously. Use whatever you want. Why now?" She said she was filing an emergency order to restrict Leary from using the driveway during certain hours, that it was for the safety and cohesion of the neighborhood. That word, cohesion, she keeps using it like it's a weapon. I don't want to be a part of it. She used her son to call 911 on my 3-year-old. "I know," he said. "That's when it stopped feeling like rules and started feeling like punishment." He hung up before I could say anything else. 5 minutes later, a Dropbox link appeared in my email from a masked address. Inside, 2 folders, one labeled HOA Hearing Packet, Vexley Submission. The other, Original Compiled Evidence, Internal Draft. The differences were surgical. In the original draft, you could hear Leary laugh as she drew. You could hear my voice narrating colors for her to mimic, part of her therapy cues. My shadow crossed the screen more than once. In the Vexley version, the clips were stitched together with the lightest trace of static between them. No sound, no adult presence. Just a child, alone, doing something undefined, ambiguous. They weren't building a case. They were creating a story. And I had the proof. I loaded the full packet into my HUD case file. Then I added Greg's folder to the City Housing Department's investigation, attaching a note. Original evidence tampered. Resident whistleblower submitted internal drafts. Chain of custody retained. Later that afternoon, I saw Nareth standing near the north flower beds by the HOA clubhouse, clipboard in hand. We didn't speak, but as I passed, he gave the faintest nod toward the building. Inside. I waited until the patio cleared before I entered. No one was in the main room, but on the long conference table, someone had left a stack of board packets. I didn't touch them, just confirmed what I suspected. The version Merla had printed and distributed to the other board members was hers, the manipulated one. No timestamps, no audio, no context. She was trying to get it on record before the hearing, but that door had already closed. At 5:12 p.m., I received a call from the HUD regional office. A field representative named Marisa Lohr introduced herself and requested an in-person interview. She had received the materials. She'd reviewed the packet differences. She was escalating the case. Based on the ADA protections you submitted, she said, and the material evidence of tampering, we're opening a formal review. We will be present at your upcoming HOA board hearing. I didn't reply right away. Marissa spoke again. And just to be clear, Mr. Routh, we're not asking the HOA for permission. The camera feed above the door blinked again as I hung up, watching, recording. But this time, it wasn't just watching me. It was watching the beginning of something Merla couldn't mute, edit, or spin. And I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I started building the presentation like I would any case file, layered, time-sequenced, and impossible to misinterpret. I didn't want arguments. I wanted compression, the kind of evidence that collapses every excuse under its own weight. By 6 a.m., I had 5 displays running in my living room, my main laptop mirrored to the TV, a secondary laptop linked to my archival drive, a tablet showing a side-by-side comparison of the original and altered footage. Each camera angle stacked chronologically, no gaps, no edits. I'd color-coded the timeline, green for unaltered footage, red for manipulated, blue for where audio had been stripped. The red stretched long across the board. I included audio waveforms of the clips. One video showed Leary drawing flowers, my voice audible behind her. That one's lavender, now try peach. In the edited version Merla submitted, that same clip had no sound, no proof I was there. I checked and rechecked everything. It had to be airtight. Because Merla's weapon wasn't just the lie, it was plausible deniability. If she could call it an accident, a formatting error, a glitch in export, she'd walk. The only way to stop her was to show that the story she told wasn't a misunderstanding. It was designed. It had steps, edits, intent. At noon, I left the house with the flash drive in a sealed envelope, labeled with my case number and HUD investigator's name. I dropped it off at the field office downtown. Then I drove straight to the county clerk's office and filed a formal request for restraining action against forced lien placement under Title 8 of the Fair Housing Act. It took 15 minutes, cost me a $42 filing fee. But it meant the HOA couldn't touch my property, not until the HUD investigation concluded. Let them come to the hearing with their smug little packets and procedural posturing. The law had already entered the room ahead of them. Back home, I found Merla's latest move waiting in my inbox. Subject, board motion. Emergency visual sanitation policy. The email included a PDF proposing a community-wide enforcement change. Any non-permanent markings visible from public spaces could now be classified as unsightly and removed without notice. Violations would incur mandatory remediation fees. The text was vague, deliberately so, but I knew exactly what it meant. They weren't just coming for Leary's drawings, they were rewriting the rules mid-conflict, hoping to wipe the slate clean before the hearing. And worst of all, the vote was set for that evening. Private, internal, no resident input. I forwarded it directly to Marisa Lohr at HUD. 10 minutes later, she called. If that vote passes, she said, it will be viewed as retaliatory conduct during an open federal investigation. That comes with consequences they're not prepared for. I looked out the window. Leary was on the porch with her chalk, drawing a new flower, yellow center, white petals. It wasn't a trail anymore, just a single bloom. One word escaped her lips as she leaned forward. Hope. I nearly lost it right there. I walked outside and sat next to her, picked up the green chalk, drew a stem under her flower. You want to do a whole row? I asked. She didn't answer, just nodded once. And so we did. Petal by petal, line by line, we worked until the sun began to drop, and the cement cooled beneath us. I heard a car drive by slowly. I didn't look to see who it was. They could watch all they wanted, because by then, the city had the footage, HUD had the documents, and I had built something stronger than a defense. I had built an accusation. Tomorrow, the board would sit in their chairs, pretending to hold the power, but the real hearing had already begun. I arrived 30 minutes early. The Crestmore Hollow community room was already half lit, the overhead fluorescents humming faintly as they warmed up. Rows of plastic chairs had been arranged in an arc, facing the elevated table where the board would sit like magistrates. A projector sat unused at the front, the white screen behind it still rolled up. I took a seat at the far end of the second row, not in front, not in back, just centered. The flash drive was in my jacket pocket. The envelope with the restraining action receipt and HUD case number was folded neatly beside it. I wasn't jittery. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was calibrated. 10 minutes later, Nereth walked in through the side door, carrying the same clipboard he always had, but no thermos this time. His eyes met mine briefly. He gave a slight nod and disappeared behind the board table. One by one, the others arrived. Laurel Trent, Greg Tanzer, 2 new board members I didn't recognize. And finally, Merla Vexley. She wore a navy blazer and cream-colored slacks. No clipboard, just a digital tablet in one hand and that trademark smirk, thin and distant, like the outcome had already been filed under inevitable. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I already knew what she thought. The room filled slowly. A few residents I recognized, some parents, 2 elderly couples. Dallin slouched in the back corner with earbuds in and his phone already aimed forward, recording. It didn't matter. Let him record. I wanted them to see it from every angle. At 6:01 p.m., Merla tapped her tablet and cleared her throat. "We'll now begin the special compliance hearing for Lot 43B, she said. Per our bylaws, we've compiled visual records of ongoing non-compliance related to surface integrity violations and behavioral disturbances originating from the property in question." She gestured toward the projector. Greg stood slowly, connecting her tablet to the input cable. The screen lowered. The first video loaded. It was their version. Muted footage, cropped angle, Leary alone, drawing flowers. My presence cut out entirely. I didn't interrupt. I let them cycle through all 6 clips, each one precisely edited to cast. Ambiguity over what should have been obvious. Each one a quiet, calculated lie. When the final video ended, Merla turned to the board. "I believe the footage speaks for itself. As such, the board will now vote to proceed with remediation authorization and the filing of a formal lien for continued non-compliance." She didn't even ask if I wanted to speak. That's when I stood and placed the sealed envelope on the board's table. "I'm submitting this for the record," I said. "It contains a restraining order against any lien filing until a pending federal investigation concludes. Case number is printed on the front." Merla's smile flickered. Greg reached for the envelope before she could stop him. "I'm also submitting digital evidence contradicting every video shown here," I continued, pulling out the flash drive. "Full context, original audio, timestamp logs, server access reports showing edit points initiated from a board credential belonging to your household. All verified, all submitted to HUD, CPS, and the City Housing Division." I handed the drive to Nereth, then I turned to the room. This board knowingly submitted falsified surveillance footage of a disabled minor to justify punitive action against her family. That minor, my daughter, was following a court-approved therapy plan. Those drawings, they were her only form of communication. This isn't enforcement, it's retaliation. Merla started to speak, but Nereth raised a hand. "We should pause," he said firmly. "We need time to review what Mr. Roth has submitted before any vote proceeds." "I move for recess," Greg added, voice low but certain. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. Laurel stared at the table. No one made eye contact with Merla. The silence was brittle. Then, from the back of the room, someone clapped. One slow clap. Then another. I turned. A woman near the exit stood with her arms folded, nodding toward the projector. "Run his version," she said. The room shifted. The board looked cornered. And Merla? She sat perfectly still, her tablet dimmed in her lap. Fingers curled so tightly around its edge her knuckles were white. She knew what was coming next. The screen flickered. For the first few seconds, no one made a sound. Then the audio kicked in, soft at first, a little static from the outdoor mic. Leary's voice, delicate and high-pitched, floated through the speakers like a thread of silk. "Peach, now purple?" Then my voice followed, calm and close. That's right. Make the loop like a little ear. Good job. Gasps broke out across the room. The footage was identical in angle to what Merla had presented earlier, but now the context filled the silence they had weaponized, the sound of presence, the cadence of care, the proof they tried to erase. Leary was not alone. She was never alone. The next clip showed me stepping into frame, crouching beside her, my hand guiding hers. The chalk transferred between us. A moment of instruction, of comfort. In the corner of the board table, Merla's finger twitched against the surface of her tablet. She looked like she wanted to speak, needed to say something, but nothing came. Greg didn't look at her, neither did Nerith. The third video clip cued. This one had the HUD timestamp overlays I'd embedded myself. Top right, unbroken runtime. Bottom left, frame origin code. The manipulation wasn't just a theory now, it was demonstrable. The sections Merla had submitted to law enforcement had been spliced from mid-clips, with full context removed. I watched the audience's body language shift. Even the people who hadn't spoken a word, older residents in the back, neighbors who'd once waved from a distance and now only peered through blinds, were leaning forward now, brows furrowed, hands folded. The line between neutrality and outrage was cracking open. Then came the most damning footage. One clip from a week ago, audio included. Dallin's voice clearly recorded through the HOA admin panel mic as he dialed 911. Yeah, there's this little kid. She's doing chalk stuff again. Mom said call it in. She says she's doing it on the wrong surface or whatever. Pause, then faint, muffled. Merla's voice in the background. Say you can't tell if she's alone. Make it sound unsure. They'll escalate faster. The room turned cold. Dallin's head snapped up from his phone in the back corner, his face drained. Even he hadn't known the audio had been caught. Someone near the front row stood, a middle-aged man in a maintenance uniform. I'd seen him once, installing siding 2 houses over. This is what the board's doing with our dues? He asked, voice low but firm. Fabricating police calls, spying on children? No one answered him. No one had to. Because the final video said everything else that needed saying. It showed Merla's admin account logged into the HOA surveillance system dashboard 3 minutes before the first video was submitted to the board. The screen mirrored her activity in real time, cropping, muting, trimming. The timestamp showed session initiated, user mvexley.admin. Then export initiated. Then overwrite confirmed. She had done it herself, with full credentials. Nerith slowly pushed back his chair. I moved to suspend Vice President Vexley from all board-related duties effective immediately, pending external investigation outcomes, he said, his voice flat. Greg seconded it before the words finished leaving his mouth. Laurel didn't speak at all, just nodded slowly, as if realizing it was already too late to save herself by staying quiet. Merla remained frozen. But Dallin? He stood up, pale and unsteady, phone still clutched in his hand. He looked toward her, toward his mother, but she didn't turn around, didn't even blink. For a moment, it looked like he might say something, but instead, he walked out. The door closed behind him, like the ending of a trial. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The screen had spoken louder than anything I ever could. The chairperson called for recess. But the damage wasn't suspended. The recess lasted 20 minutes, but Merla never moved from her seat. She sat rigid, both hands resting on her folded tablet like she was still in control of something, anything. But the spell was broken. The confidence, the cadence, the rehearsed precision of her meetings had collapsed under a weight she hadn't prepared for. Documentation she didn't control. When the board reconvened, the atmosphere in the room had changed. The artificial tension was gone, replaced with something raw. Discomfort, yes, but also clarity. Nerith took the center chair, not Merla. The board meeting of Crestmore Hollow will resume, he said. His voice was quiet but definitive, and it cut through the murmurs like a closing gavel. This session will now consider the formal resident grievance submitted by Mr. Colvin Routh regarding abuse of authority, surveillance misconduct, and falsified violation procedures. Merla didn't flinch, but her knuckles had gone bone white again, wrapped around the tablet she hadn't opened since the recess started. Greg cleared his throat. Before we proceed, I'd like to state for the record, I personally reviewed the unedited footage provided by Mr. Routh. There is no doubt in my mind that the materials previously submitted by board leadership were intentionally altered to remove key context. Laurel finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't know it was altered. I trusted what I was given. You had access to the same footage I did, Nareth said without looking at her. Every board member does. It's not enough to claim ignorance after voting to fine a father over his child's therapy plan. Several residents in the audience shifted. The woman who had clapped earlier crossed her arms and stared hard at the board. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been submitted. Nareth continued. We have received notice from the HUD regional office that Crestmore Hollow is now under preliminary investigation for ADA noncompliance and discriminatory enforcement. All enforcement actions related to Lot 43B are officially suspended, pending that review. A quiet gasp from someone near the back. Dallin's chair was still empty. Then Greg added, Additionally, I have submitted an internal motion to dissolve the visual sanitation policy recently drafted by Vice President Vexley, citing it as retaliatory and legally unviable. It was meant to preserve property standards, Merla said, finally breaking her silence. Everyone turned to her. She lifted her chin. Her voice was even, but the edges were frayed now. This community depends on consistency, uniformity. We have standards. If we allow one resident to break that structure, regardless of their personal hardship, then what stops the next? What stops the whole street from becoming chaos? Nareth looked at her with something colder than anger. The line, Merla, is when you use that structure to hurt a child, to silence her, to lie. You think this won't backfire? She said. You think the residents here want chaos? That they'll thank you when every child starts scribbling on sidewalks and your property values drop? This time, it was a voice from the back row that answered her. Better that, a man said firmly, than living in fear of a chalk flower. There was a small ripple of agreement, low but audible. Not loud enough to be a rebellion, just loud enough to signal that the neighborhood had begun to see the difference between rules and cruelty. Merla stood. I will not be part of a board that allows disorder under the guise of emotional exemption, she said. You're letting sentiment replace policy. And with that, she walked out. No vote, no further argument. Just the soft tap of her heels on tile and the echo of her exit. No one stopped her. Not even Laurel. Nareth looked down at the notes in front of him, then closed the folder. This hearing is concluded, he said. All enforcement against Lot 43B is void. A full board review will be scheduled in light of today's evidence. He looked to me. Mr. Routh, on behalf of those of us who should have spoken sooner, thank you. I nodded, not out of pride, but out of something else, something harder to define, not victory, relief, not that I'd won, that it had finally stopped. Leary didn't understand what had happened, not in the way adults frame justice and vindication, but she understood that nobody stopped her when she walked outside that morning with her chalk. She understood that no one shouted, no sirens echoed, no strangers pointed phones at her. She understood peace, and that was enough. I sat on the porch steps with my coffee going cold, watching her crouch near the edge of the driveway. It had rained lightly overnight, just enough to erase the last of her petals. She didn't seem to mind. She drew new ones, fresh lines, a new start. Neighbors passed by. Not all of them waved, but a few did. Some slowed down and smiled at her drawings. One man gave a quick thumbs up as he jogged past. No one looked angry, no one reached for a camera. Crestmore Hollow had shifted, just slightly, but enough. By noon, the HOA site had been updated. Merla's name was gone. Greg had posted a statement about transparency and board reforms. There was a promise of a third-party compliance auditor for future citations, and a new clause, approved unanimously, had been added to the community handbook. Non-permanent expressive materials used by minors on private property are not subject to enforcement actions unless demonstrably harmful. No more citations for chalk. No more warnings taped to our mailbox. No more cameras aimed like lasers at a child's creativity. Nareth stopped by later that day. He didn't bring a clipboard, just 2 lemon muffins in a brown paper bag and a tight, regretful smile. She's talented, he said, nodding toward the line of chalk spirals curling across the driveway. I hope she keeps drawing. She will, I said, now that no one's calling the cops on her. He nodded, solemn. I've stepped down, he added. Not in disgrace, just tired. I should have said something sooner. You said something when it mattered, I replied. That's more than most ever do. He didn't argue, just handed me the muffins and left. Leary finished her drawing just before sunset. A new bloom trail, bolder than any she'd done before. Red, yellow, blue, orange. Each flower with 6 petals, each one with a green stem and a little heart in the center. When she stood and took my hand, she looked up and said softly, "Safe now?" My voice caught, but I managed a nod. "Yeah, baby, safe now." We went inside as the streetlights flickered on. I turned off the porch camera. I didn't need it anymore. Let Merla watch somewhere else, if she still needed to. We had nothing left to hide. What they tried to erase, my daughter's voice, her therapy, our dignity, it didn't just survive, it bloomed, and they'll never be able to bleach that out of the pavement. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.